So how did you decide what should and shouldn't be in the book?
Well, I didn't. It's very simple. The editor, Sinclair Stevenson, came along and said, could we, put a book together? I said, well, help yourself. So I gave him the accumulated rubbish of 30 years, and you can see how much he thought of it. He reduced it to that.
But a book like this is a very personal matter. Didn't it worry you what went in and what didn't?
No, not really, because it's all been out already. I mean, if I was going to take any kicks, it was all been published. I mean, I said it all. The only thing that obviously you have slight anxiety is that whether anything that you wrote 30 years ago is still relevant today. Mm-hmm. Because I do sympathize with sort of aging politicians. They keep tripping up over quotations, which
I think the other thing that surprised me was that unlike those aging politicians, you write most of your speeches yourself, whereas they often leave it to private secretaries.
Well, I wouldn't know. Yes, I do it myself.
I mean, is that stern sense of duty, or is it because you want to say something particularly?
No, it's just, I don't know, it just seems to be the obvious way of doing it, I think.
But it must be difficult for you, of all people, to write speeches and to keep them relevant and meaty, which you do, when you're so close to the sovereign and have to be necessarily apolitical.
Oh, but there are an awful lot of subjects that are apolitical, if you come to think of it. In any case, political means of public interest, put it that way. And there's an awful lot of stuff which is of public interest, which is not party political. I mean, it's not partisan, and provided I keep off subjects which are currently in dispute between two political parties, and I'm reasonably safe, I think.
You talk there also of that it's not just you for whom there are taboo subjects. You talk in the book about the general ones and how they've changed since Victorian times.
Well, I didn't actually say that particularly. I think, yes, there are... I don't think I wasn't really talking about taboo subjects in the sense of things that are not polite conversation. I think they certainly have changed. Yes, you can say things now which I dare say 100 years ago people would have fainted dead away. Now, I think that taboo subjects are really things that are like sacred cows. I mean, the media is a taboo subject as far as I'm concerned, because the media has practically no sense of humour about itself, so it's very difficult.
So you're saying that we are one of your sacred cows in the book?
Well, you're a taboo subject.
Are there any more that I can push you into talking about?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons they're taboo subjects is that I don't talk about them.
Right. So much for the sacred cows. Let's move on to
the sacred cows are all different. Those are things that you daren't talk about. I mean, daren't criticise, put it that way, because they're they're elevated in the public mind. They've got a sort of status which is simply unassailable, and therefore you must on no account say anything about them. I mean, I suppose the obvious sacred cow is, let's say, the National Health Service, because it is there, and you're probably much safer not to say anything about it.
Let's move on to the men in the title. One thing that comes through very, very clearly is your concern that the individual shouldn't be lost in the bureaucracy of state. It is something you feel very strongly about, isn't it?
Is that very unusual?
I think you have it's a particular hallmark, actually, of your writing, this concern for the individual.
Well, I mean, you've only got to travel about and you've only got to see what has happened in other countries and what the consequences of dictatorships. In a sense, the philosophy that individuals are there for the sake of the state, and I think that seems to be wrong to me. It seems to me the state is there for the sake of the individual. People they've got very good intentions. They feel that they know better, but in a way, I don't think if you have a system in which people are not actively involved and don't. When I say actively involved, are not considered in any way, as if the significance is the individuals in a state rather than the state is more important. I think if you always keep saying that it's in the public interest that people should behave in a particular way, you end up by being pushed around because somebody decides that I know what the public interest is and you don't. Therefore, you're off to prison or whatever.
You say what people need is also is a sense of purpose. I mean, by that do you mean control of your destiny in the way that you were just saying just then?
No, not necessarily control of your destiny, but at least some idea of what it is you're trying to achieve, or where you're trying to go, or what you're trying to make of yourself, and what part you're playing in the community. I think an awful lot of people, you tend to arrive in a situation as you grow up, and there is the community, and there are all the constraints and the systems, and you sort of take it all for granted. And then the tendency, I think, is to become very selfish. And you forget that, or you don't even realize, perhaps, that the community is that way because individuals are making it that way. And instead of, therefore, I think people tend to try and take advantage of it or kick it around because they say, well, it doesn't really matter. What influence do I have on it? But the fact is that it's the combined effect of a lot of people having some idea that the only way you're going to get a satisfactory community is if we all muck in together and make it more satisfactory, and somehow have a feeling that, well, even if we don't make it particularly satisfactory for ourselves, there's a chance that if we do it right, it might be better for our children or grandchildren or whatever. Instead of saying, after me the deluge.
A lot of us, I think, still have very Victorian attitudes
I don't believe.
Well, I think they have.
Speak for yourself.
All right. I have a Victorian attitude that work is good and what I do in my spare time is fairly incidental. Do you think that'll change, or do you think it's changing?
No, I think work is good. I don't think that's not quite the same thing. I think that what you do, I don't think is necessarily as important. I mean, I don't think to judge people by their jobs is rather a limited way of judging the individual, because it's what a person is. I mean, what he's altogether. And in many cases, what people do in their spare time, in their leisure time, is more important than the work that or more important, it was more significant socially, let's say, than their job. I mean, take, for instance, there are a lot of people in local government who may have relative unimportant jobs. I mean, when I say unimportant, I mean, they're very important in what they're doing, but they're socially not all that important, maybe employed in the factory. But in their elective job as a local councillor, of course, they're far more significant. They may be more significant, for instance, a factory worker, maybe secretary of the local football club, for instance. Well, socially, the work he does as a secretary of the football club, maybe voluntary, is in a sense, from the community point of view, far more valuable. And I think that people ought to be judged much more by what they are, and how they behave and what they do in their, in a sense, discretionary time, than necessarily entirely on the basis of what they do to earn their living, which may be not frightfully significant.
But do you think then that our schools should be taking note of this and actually educating people to make use of their spare time?
Well, I think a lot do. I think traditionally, of course, the schools that have the or feel or have the time certainly do that. I mean, there are all the extracurricular activities, the clubs and societies and things of that sort. But I think the difficulty with so many schools today is that there is such a pressure on acquiring particularly intellectual qualifications, which then somehow or other will qualify you for entry into certain jobs. But of course, the way in which you do the job very often depends on many other things, on what sort of person you are again.
Nevertheless, I think you've also said, and I hope I'm not misquoting you, that there isn't enough attention paid to character building because people aren't going to get civilized values just by trial and error, or it's going to take a long time.
Well, I never referred to character building because it somehow sounds as if it's rather like brainwashing or something, as if you can create, because people are very often going to be what they are in spite of practically everything you do to them. I think that they should be exposed to much greater experience, in a sense, where they can find out from themselves what's good, what's bad, what's interesting, what's damaging, and so on. So I think it's not so much character building. I think it's allowing people to develop by, in a sense, both self-discovery and discovery of what goes on in the world. I mean, there are a lot of things that I'm connected with that do exactly that. There's the award scheme, for instance, which is the whole basis of the exercise, is self-discovery. There's the Outward Bound schools, there's the Sail Training Association. They're all really doing much the same thing. They're trying to give people the opportunity to discover for themselves what life could be like.
Now, among the many things you've done this year, you've also, and last year, been patron of the exhibition of Prince Albert, the Royal College of Art put on. And I know you don't invite comparisons at all, and I slightly tremble, but one of your biographers has said that when you became engaged, you read as much as you could about the life of Prince Albert.
I think he was looking at himself in my position. I think he would have done that. I didn't really, no. It's not strictly true. I mean, I was interested in, generally speaking, in what happened in those days, but no, I didn't make a particular... There wasn't really very much time either.
But you have given, haven't you, even though you've said constitutionally I don't exist, you've given your role as consort, which is a difficult role, considerable thought as to what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing.
Well, I never thought of it as a role. I mean, it's just a way of life. I mean, it's just, I just got on with what seems to be the sensible thing to do under the circumstances. I mean, I don't visualize myself as playing a part.
You nevertheless, forgive me, do play some sort of role. You do have one function anyway, as I see it, among many others, which is to help promote monarchy and the image of monarchy, and to look after it very carefully.
No, you make it sound as if I was some sort of PR agency. No, I don't. In fact, I'm very doubtful about the whole concept of deliberately trying to create an image, because I think that it's very easily rumbled. I think that an image develops out of what you do. If you don't wholly believe in what you're doing, I mean, you can't create a different image. And so I think the only thing to do is to get on and do the best you can with the facilities and in the circumstances, and hope you make a reasonably sensible judgment. But not to do it with a view to, well, what effect is this going to have? Except in certain limited sense. I mean, obviously we're talking about the encouragement of engineering and science. Then obviously you go out and say, well, yes, the object of taking an interest in this is to promote engineering and science or something of that sort. And the same thing with let's say, fundraising or whatever it is. You go out and deliberately do something in the hope that people will take an interest in it and then produce some funds.